My name is Brandon. I'm 42 years old, and I live in the suburbs of Minneapolis with my wife, Caitlin. On paper, I'm a full-time house husband. What few people know is that behind that quiet facade, I'm the CEO of a medical equipment distribution company that brings in millions of dollars in revenue each year. My salary is around $145,000 a year, but Caitlin has never had a clue. We met at a friend's gathering when I had just turned 30. Back then, Caitlin was a warm, attentive woman with a charming way of speaking. She noticed every little detail, like how I held my coffee cup with my left hand, or the way my eyes lit up when my favorite song was mentioned. I used to think if I could spend my life with someone like that, it would be the greatest blessing. We got married after nearly a year of dating. At first, I truly believed I had chosen the right person. But that seemingly lasting happiness began to fade when Caitlin started showing her true self. She began making excuses not to change jobs. Even though her current salary barely covered basic expenses, when I gently offered suggestions, she brushed them off, sometimes even saying, "Don't try to make me live by your standards. I'm not your employee." I tried to talk her into it many times. Even when my company had an opening in the administrative department, a role that only required basic communication skills and a professional attitude, the salary was more than double what Caitlin was making. I even personally spoke to the head of HR to hold the position for her. But when I brought it up, Caitlin frowned and said, "You think I'm so useless. I need my husband to get me a job. Don't meddle in my business." I was stunned. I couldn't understand how someone who once said she loved me so deeply could now take sincere advice as an insult. Her stubbornness baffled me, but even after being shut down, I kept trying to endure. I thought, as long as I made enough money to keep life stable, everything would work out. Every month, I regularly deposited $400 into Caitlin's account as a living allowance. She would burn through it in less than 2 weeks, then text me complaints about food prices, gas prices, how life was stressful. I stayed silent, not because I didn't know she was spending the money on frivolous things like shoe collections or online games, but because I was too exhausted to argue with my income. That amount wasn't significant. But what hurt me wasn't the money. It was her growing indifference. She never once asked if I was tired after a long day. Never noticed when I stayed up late answering emails or had to fly to 2 different cities in 1 week. In Caitlin's eyes, I was just a man living off the money she provided, and she was the one working hard to keep this home together. I remember one time my father came over to help tidy the house while I was in online meetings all morning. As soon as Caitlin got home, she tossed her keys on the table and said something that made my father freeze. "Another stranger in the house again. I need my peace and quiet." I stood up, took a deep breath, and spoke through clenched anger. "He's not a stranger. He came here to help us, not to be disrespected like that." Caitlin just shrugged. "That's how you see it, but not me. I have a right to feel uncomfortable in my own house." I turned away, hiding the tears that had started to fall. That was the first time I felt a crack in our marriage that couldn't be repaired. After that day, there was a strange silence between us. We still lived under the same roof, shared dinner, sometimes watched the same TV show, but everything felt cold and forced. No more random hugs, no more goodnight wishes, just 2 people living side by side, as if the bond between us had dried up and turned into routine. Caitlin became increasingly irritable. She'd get mad over little things like a towel not folded the way she liked, or the TV remote not in the right spot. She blamed me when the coffee machine broke, even though she was the last one who used it. It was like I had become the scapegoat for every little frustration in her life. I started to feel like a maid in my own home. One evening, I came back from a tense meeting, hadn't even taken off my shoes yet, when Caitlin stood in the kitchen holding up a shirt and snapped, "This shirt isn't even ironed. Do you ever do anything right?" I gave a hollow laugh, swallowing my anger. I used to be the man running around pitching to major clients, negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. Now I was being asked if I knew how to use an iron. I said nothing. The more I talked, the more she twisted my words, blamed me, and tore into everything I tried so hard to preserve. I was starting to feel drained. My body was okay, but my spirit was worn thin. I remember once when I had the flu, running a high fever, and unable to get out of bed, Caitlin didn't even check on me. Instead of bringing me medicine or asking how I felt, she just stood at the door and said, "Hurry up and get better. I don't have time to take care of you." I didn't expect much, but those words sent a chill down my spine. That wasn't something a wife should say to her husband. That was something a stranger would say when forced to live with someone they didn't like. The loneliness became more and more overwhelming. I felt lost in my own life. When did the woman who once held my hand at our wedding, promising to walk through life with me, become the one who hurt me the most? At that point, I started having restless nights, often waking up in the middle of the night wondering why I was still here. Why was I a strong, successful man who had overcome so many obstacles, putting up with such a damaging relationship? I didn't tell anyone, not even my father, Francis, who had always loved and protected me like I was his greatest treasure. He called many times to check in, but I always said everything was fine. I didn't want him to worry, didn't want anyone to see my weakness, but I never expected Caitlin to drag my father into this in the worst way. One Saturday afternoon, my father came over. He brought my favorite stew and a basket of fresh fruit. I was chatting with him when Caitlin walked in. She took one look and sighed loudly, dropped her bag, and muttered, "Again. There's always someone sitting around this house." My father was startled but kept his smile. He tried to stay polite. "I'm just dropping by to see my son for a bit. I'm not intruding." Caitlin shrugged, opened the fridge to grab a drink, and spoke like I wasn't even there. "I don't want to have dinner with outsiders. Some people just don't know how to respect boundaries." I stood frozen. In that moment, I saw my father hesitate. He gently set his bowl down, glanced at me, and softly said, "I think I should go. I'll come by another time." I walked him to the door, heart sinking. When the door shut behind him, I turned to Caitlin, my voice no longer holding back. "Do you realize how hurtful you're being?" She looked at me unfazed. "I'm just being honest. If you can't handle that, that's your problem." I stood still in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The house no longer felt warm. Everything I had built now felt like it was falling apart piece by piece. At that moment, I had no idea that just a few weeks later, something major would happen and change everything. And in my most vulnerable moment, Caitlin would show her true colors more clearly than ever. I don't remember exactly when I collapsed, only that the office lights dimmed and everything faded to black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed in the emergency wing of Mayo Clinic, an IV in my arm and my head heavy, like I had just gone through a storm. The doctor said I had fainted due to prolonged exhaustion and needed further tests because some of my readings were unusual. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had always been strong, used to a fast-paced life, and figured I'd be fine after a few days of rest. But 2 days later, I was brought into a private room to hear the diagnosis. "We found a tumor in your pancreas," the doctor said, looking straight at me. "Fortunately, we caught it early, but you'll need to start treatment immediately. This won't be easy." I heard his voice, but everything else sounded muffled. The ground beneath me felt like it was slipping away. I wasn't afraid of the illness. I was afraid of facing it alone. That night, I texted Caitlin briefly, saying I was in the hospital and needed to talk. She didn't reply. I called. Her phone rang, then went to voicemail. Not a single message, not a word of concern. I began treatment without her by my side. The infusions drained my body. My taste buds faded, and my hair started falling out. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a different man. Frail, pale, but with eyes still burning with life. I kept fighting, not just for myself, but because I knew there was still something I hadn't let go of. I couldn't let Caitlin walk out of my life that easily. She didn't deserve that. For 2 weeks, I fought alone in the hospital without a single family member in sight. I lied to my father, telling him I was on a business trip so he wouldn't worry. But then on a Thursday afternoon, Caitlin showed up. I thought I was dreaming. She stood at the hospital room door, hands in her pockets, eyes cold. "You're here," I said softly, my voice from exhaustion. She didn't respond right away. She walked in, placed a folder on the bedside table, and spoke like she was negotiating a contract. "I've filed for divorce. The house and the car will be in my name. I think that's fair. As for you, I'm not even sure how long you'll be around." I stared at her, stunned. Something inside me shattered into pieces, not because she was abandoning me. I'd already expected that, but because of the sheer coldness in every word. She didn't come to check on me. She came to claim what she thought she was entitled to, as if I was someone whose value was about to run out. I pressed my lips together, hiding every emotion. I didn't want her to see me weak. I nodded and said quietly, "Pick whatever you want. Thank you for coming." Caitlin paused, maybe surprised by how easily I agreed. She shrugged, turned away, and said one last thing. "Not like you have a choice anyway." When the door clicked shut behind her, I didn't cry. Instead, a cold smile tugged at my lips. I whispered to myself, "You just woke up the real me, Caitlin, and soon you'll realize you made the biggest mistake of your life." I picked up the bedside phone and called the one person at my company I trusted, Eric, my chief financial officer. He had always been loyal, discreet, and the one who knew best just how much power I truly held. "Eric, I need your help with something," I said, my voice unusually calm. He was quiet for a moment, then answered, "I've been waiting for this call. Just say the word." I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see me. I lay still in that white hospital room, watching the soft sunlight filter through the curtains, strangely at peace. Maybe because I had finally decided to let Caitlin go, but not the way she thought. She wanted to discard me at my weakest. Fine. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't the one who needed to be set free. It was her, from the life I'd carried on my back. A life she never even knew I built. 3 days after that cold hospital visit, Eric came to see me. No flowers, no sweets, just a leather briefcase containing everything I needed. He set it on the table and asked gently, "Are you sure you want to go through with this plan?" I looked straight at him, my gaze unwavering. "Yes." and I want everything to start tomorrow." Eric understood. He was the only one in the company who knew I had used my father's name as the legal representative to keep my identity hidden. I'd always wanted to live modestly, never letting Caitlin know I was the one behind the major contracts her company depended on. Looking back, maybe I had been too kind. The next morning, I signed a short letter terminating the supply agreement between my company and Vital, where Caitlin worked in logistics. That contract made up over 60% of Vitaltech's revenue last quarter, and I was the one who had approved it after a pitch led by Caitlin nearly a year ago. I remembered clearly how excited she was, boasting that it was thanks to her that the company had secured a deal with a major partner without ever realizing that major partner was sitting just one bedroom wall away. The termination letter was sent out at 8 a.m. Monday. By 3 p.m., I received a call from the CEO of Vital, Mr. Peterson. He kept it brief. "We're quite surprised. If possible, we'd like to know the reason," I replied, calm but firm. "I've been made aware that one of your employees has demonstrated inappropriate behavior, disrespect toward male colleagues, and signs of misusing company assets. As a major partner, I cannot condone that." There was a pause before he asked, "What's the name of that employee?" I answered simply, "Caitlin Scott." That afternoon, Caitlin came home late, looking pale. She had no idea I had hired a private lawyer to send her a counter-divorce filing. This time with a clause requiring her to vacate the house, which was under my name, within 30 days. That house, by the way, I bought. I only added her name to appease my prideful wife. Caitlin opened the fridge to get some water without saying a word. Then after a few moments of silence, she finally said softly, "I got laid off." I set my book down, not the least bit surprised, because of the terminated contract with my company. She turned to look at me, eyes full of disbelief. "How do you know?" I walked slowly to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. I placed it on the table and said, my voice calm to the point of being unnerving, "Because I'm the one who ended that contract. I'm the CEO of SilverMed, Caitlin, the company you proudly claim to have won over, the company you thought you were smart enough to convince." Caitlin froze. She looked at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I continued, "For all these years, I've paid every bill, covered your credit card debt, paid tuition for your nephew when your cousin hit hard times. I transferred over $1,500 a month to you in allowance. When your actual salary didn't even come close to that, I did it all. Because I believed in something called love." Caitlin stepped back. She grabbed the envelope from the table, opened it with trembling hands, then looked up. This can't be real." I smiled. "Divorce papers, asset division terms, and your meeting schedule with my lawyer. You have 30 days to move out, and the $3,200 monthly mortgage payment. I won't be covering that anymore." She was stunned. The air thickened around us, filled only by the heavy breathing of the woman who once leaned on me like the whole world belonged to her. I walked away, leaving her there with numbers and a brutal reality crashing down. In my heart, there was no hatred, just clarity. Caitlin had lived too long in the shadow I created. Now it was time for her to step out and face what she had taken for granted. Just 3 days after Caitlin received the official divorce papers from my lawyer, the hospital room phone rang near midnight. I was exhausted from my second round of chemo. But when I saw her name on the screen, I knew right away the panic had begun. "Brandon, please just hear me out." Her voice was shaky, raw, like she'd been crying. I said nothing. On the other end was a woman in free fall, and I, the one she had once left behind, was now the only lifeline she was desperately clinging to. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was stupid. I thought you were just some dependent man. But now I know. You were the one holding everything together. You were the reason my life didn't fall apart. I put the phone on speaker, leaned back against my pillow, and closed my eyes. Not because I was moved, but because I wanted to hear every desperate word. Something I had once wished for, back when I lay in a hospital bed, battling illness alone. Caitlin kept going, her voice rising with urgency. I've lost everything. The house is about to be foreclosed because I can't make the payments. The company, they didn't just fire me. They put a formal warning in my file. No one else will hire me now. Brandon, please give me another chance. I opened my eyes, watching the soft glow of the nightlight. Calm and cold, I spoke. A chance. You had a whole decade to respect me, to love, to share, to understand. And you chose not to. Now that everything you were used to is gone, now you realize my worth. Too late, Caitlin. I know you're angry, but we were happy once. Please remember those times. I'm begging you. I smiled faintly. Caitlin, do you remember the name Alex? The other end of the line suddenly went silent. I could hear her breath catch. How? How did you find out about that? I spoke each word sharp as a blade. The CEO of Vital Tech called to apologize and happened to mention they'd quietly investigated an internal complaint. Turns out you had a personal relationship with the new intern, Alex Morgan, 24 years old, son of the Chicago branch director. Should I go into detail about those late overtime nights? Caitlin started stammering. No, it's not what you think. It wasn't like that. You're right. It was worse than I thought. I hung up, not another word. Right after I opened my contacts, hit block. I also emailed my lawyer requesting a no-contact clause during the divorce proceedings and began preparing a civil suit for breach of marital duty. In the state of Minnesota, with proof of infidelity, the betrayed spouse can file for emotional damages, and I had plenty. The next morning, my lawyer, Eliza Harper, came to the hospital. She showed me a stack of screenshots from conversations between Caitlin and Alex. Flirtatious messages, hotel meetups, even selfies taken in the Vital Tech office, all time-stamped and geotagged. I wasn't shocked. I just felt relieved. Every suspicion I'd pushed aside now had a name. I've sent a formal demand for $85,000 in damages, Eliza said. She'll likely contest it, but with this evidence, the court will be on your side. I nodded. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed my dignity placed where it belonged. A week later, I was discharged temporarily for at-home monitoring. During that time, Caitlin tried to contact me through emails, social media, even showed up at my company's office. Not knowing security had already been instructed not to let her anywhere near. Every attempt to win me back only confirmed one thing. Caitlin didn't love me. She just didn't know how to live without me. I started rewriting my financial plans, this time with no more wife's living expenses category. I also approved Eric to hand over the COO role to a new hire so I could step back, slow down, and finally enjoy some peace. And when I stood on the balcony of my new home, the one I moved into after leaving the old house full of memories and pain, I closed my eyes and felt the cool breeze brushing through the short new hair that had begun to grow after treatment. I didn't need a woman to feel worthy. I just needed myself. Strong, clear-headed, and never again letting anyone else define my life. Rumors of Caitlin's downfall spread like wildfire in the local business community. Vital Tech cut the contract, and her termination file was quietly circulated to partner companies and industry contacts. Soon enough, Caitlin became the name everyone wanted to avoid. A logistics employee caught in a scandal and facing legal consequences for breach of marital duty. With no home to return to, Caitlin moved in temporarily with an old friend in a cheap apartment complex in Brooklyn Park. A few weeks later, I heard she sold the car she once proudly called her symbol of freedom. Part of the money went toward paying off credit card debt, the same cards she had used so freely to buy gaming gear and lavish meals. No one wanted to hire someone with a stain on their record and no practical skills. Eventually, she had to accept a job on the night shift at a delivery center where the meager paycheck wasn't enough to cover monthly bills. Calls from collection agencies started piling up. Her small apartment echoed with the sound of late-night phone rings, not from loved ones, but from places chasing unpaid debts. As for Alex, the young man who once laughed with Caitlin after hours, he vanished from social media just days after the scandal broke. I didn't know what happened to him until Eliza, my lawyer, told me his family had agreed to settle part of the damages privately to avoid public litigation. Word had it his parents took him back to their farm in Iowa and cut all ties with his former life. For them, that was the only way to salvage the family's reputation. As for me, my final treatment ended on a crisp autumn morning. When the doctor looked at me and said, "Your test results show you're completely clear," I didn't say a word. I just smiled and gently squeezed his hand. It was the moment I felt reborn. I returned to work after 2 months of rest. But this time, I wasn't the same Brandon who tried to balance career and marriage. Now I was Brandon on my own terms, focused, calm, and no longer weighed down by anyone who couldn't see my worth. The company welcomed me back with a simple but heartfelt team meeting. Everyone stood and clapped when I entered the main conference room. Eric smiled and handed me a mug that read, "Welcome back, boss." I had once doubted whether I could start over, but in that moment, I knew not only had I come back, I'd come back stronger than ever. In the months that followed, I received more than a few date invitations, some from business partners, a few from old friends who had followed my story online, but I turned them all down. Not because I'd closed my heart forever, but because I knew I still needed time to heal, to enjoy a life no longer bound by responsibility to someone unworthy. I bought a small lakeside house in Duluth, where I could watch the sunrise each morning and listen to birdsong each evening. It wasn't grand, not as luxurious as the old house, but it was my space, peaceful, whole, and no one entered unless invited. One weekend afternoon, while I was brewing tea in the kitchen, Eric stopped by. We sat on the porch watching the lake shimmer under the golden sunset. "Have you thought about getting married again?" he asked, half teasing. I looked at him and smiled softly. "Not right now, maybe someday. But for now, I'm happy like this." He nodded, saying nothing more. The breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and in that moment I knew I hadn't just overcome Caitlin or the illness. I had overcome the fear that once kept me silent too long. I took a sip of hot tea, thinking quietly to myself. In the end, I became the one who wrote the final chapter of my story. From my own journey, I've learned that resilience doesn't come from moments of strength, but from the times we rise after being pushed to our lowest. I once gave my heart to someone unworthy, once sacrificed in silence without recognition. But now I live for myself, no longer trying to please anyone. True happiness began the moment I chose to put my self-respect above everything else. What do you think of Brandon's journey and his decisive choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful and heartfelt real-life stories.